I took the L&N to Ellijay. I rode in the cab because I asked. I guess we felt the same about regulations, me and that fireman. Hog law is a modified form of actual railroad regulations. Hog law is the law we were using. In later years, when I told this story in knowledgeable company, I understood that the cab may have actually been short a man in Knoxville that morning, and they may have been using the 14-year-old me to technically strengthen their case for an on-time departure. They may have been actually trying to work within the real hog law, 3 in the cab or train don't go. I don't honestly remember how many of us there were in the cab that morning. However many, it was because I asked. But I was not a congenital flouter. I just wanted to see the track ahead, same as when I walked it. I would have sat at a passenger window if they'd turned me down, although then I would have had to choose a side, west or east, right or left, since I was going south. Choosing a side means you miss half of what's going on in the world. In minutes, we had straight-lined over the river, and I was able to look outward through the rusted steel triangles of the ancient central truss of the old NS Bridge. I had looked inwards many times through those same steel isosceles. Isosceles, that's both singular and plural, for two sides equal, other side not equal, in this case one equal side vertical to the sky, very strong. I'd looked inwards many times from fishing on the river below, but it's different looking out and up at the clouds. It's like you're protected or privileged. You're in a cage, but that gives you license for a less guarded viewing of your surrounds. So I saw the river, the sky, the oaks and hickories on Cherokee Bluff. If you know the area, you know from that which side I would have chosen to sit on if I hadn't had the cab view. By the way, if you ever have a chance, like if you have a spelunking friend who later got a PhD in chiroptery, the study of bats, if you ever have a chance to go in the cave at the bottom of that river bluff, I recommend against it. If your headlamp goes out, and even if you have a good topological memory for mazes and tunnels, it's just not all that much fun. Other than the cab's window giving me a higher up angle, we didn't see a single particle of that track in the first hour that I hadn't seen and walked myself. Cross tie after every other tie after every other tie. I had never been much for riding the rails, except in books and songs, and nothing at all on riding the rods, which are the metal lines under the car. But walking, that's another matter. I had walked every railroad line within 5 miles of my house in every direction. I liked to see where those lines went and how they got there. Although the mere fact that I could get to uncrowded fishing holes would have been good enough. You'd be amazed at the backcountry places a railroad goes, even inside city limits, even near roads and bridges and parking lots and stores, particularly in a place like Knoxville, with so many creeks and streams and the periodic flooding and unflooding of arms from the TVA-controlled Fort Loudon Lake. I had caught a lot of fish in places few fishermen had ever been since the railroad had been constructed, which was in the 1850s. So, as we made the long, gentle curve past the quarry through South Knoxville and into Vestal, it was very familiar to me, though I liked the view from up high. It was like I had my own moving eagle's eyrie and was surveying my territory as my tree moved ponderously across the landscape. We soon crossed the Little River. That's its name, and suitably. It flows from deep in the Smokies and holds many secrets up in its rhododendron-draped headwaters. We crossed on an old rusted trestle box, but that too was known to me. I had caught a batch of fair-sized crappies there around one of the piers on a homemade two-pieced wiggle lure. I could see a moderately ripping current above and below the bridge. The water had been quite slack the day I caught my crappies. Only when we got to the Little T, stands for Tennessee, also a river, did we really get out of my previous range. Though all the way down the Big T, Tennessee Valley, as we picked up speed, it looked familiar. Farms, fences, water holes, barns, houses, various specimens of cattle pointed in different directions, road crossings, cars moving and stopped, and as Steve Goodman wrote and sang about a locomotive called the City of New Orleans, the occasional graveyard of rusted automobiles. I saw right away that I could have walked to Chattanooga if I had to, straight shot on a gentle decline south. Some people did. In the summer of 1864, whole federal armies did, the ones who weren't riding like I was now. A little about railroad walking. Walking a railroad is a non-trivial physical act. At least for me at age 14 it was, when I had not yet developed my full stride. Railroad ties are just over 1.5 feet center to center, which makes for a full yard on alternate ties. And you can't be permitting a gradual diminishing of that stride, or sooner or later you're going to have an arch-crushing impact on a tar-infused white oak edge that will stick with you for years. Woody Guthrie was not a tall man, nor Leadbelly, or even Johnny Cash, and they all skipped ties. Neither John Steinbeck, or for that matter, Zane Grey, or Louis D'Amour, none of those were giants. So they must have had a swinging gait not unlike mine. Same with Walt Disney. Of course, a typical youthful arrogance is to step up and tightrope it on the slick, shiny steel rail itself. And it is possible to get pretty good at that over short distances, although you become dangerously and alternately pigeon-toed and duck-footed. No disrespect to those airworthy avians, who incidentally would be much better at the occasional necessarily unbalanced flight across the gravel to the opposite rail. That's a 4 foot, 8.5 inch leap right there. But sooner or later, you will disintegrate an ankle on a slip or a glancing miss on the steel, and you will return to the ties, the tie after tie gravel bed, just like everybody else. That's probably why there's no name for that rail balancing practice that I ever heard of, or any legends about it. On the other hand, there are no sudden turns on a railroad or dramatic angles of grade, and right of way is a foregone conclusion. You can walk at night on a railroad track and not worry about anything except that one obvious problem, though because it is obvious and reasonably well lit and infrequent, it's pretty easy to deal with. East Tennessee is not known for really long bridges where you could have a roadway exit problem. The only other pedestrian strategy worth mentioning is the remaining mathematical possibility, which is occasionally attempted, that is, trying to tiptoe like a ballerina on successive adjacent ties with a 1.5 foot stride. But with that, you'll soon find yourself rattled into an exhausted, shin-splinted heap before you get around the first big curve. Little kids can do that. I did give serious thought to constructing one of those Buster Keaton seesaw lever-driven one-man wagons that propel you down the track. I could easily see the range and power of one of those, although I worry a lot about how to get it off the track when the rightful tonnage showed up. But I didn't have that kind of Wright Brothers bicycle shop background, no access to rail-gripping wheels and axles, etc. I didn't get too far, but it was a soapbox dream of mine. Some years later, when, in the George C. Scott movie The Flim Flam Man, I saw the devious but soft-hearted character Mordecai Jones solve the rail wheels problem by half deflating the rubber tires of his truck and driving right on top of the rails like a road to escape the law. But I knew without checking that the wheelbase of the average truck is too wide to get the tires precisely on the rails. Once again, a case of cinematic fantasy not solving the problems of real life. Good idea, though. The thing about a railroad is that it goes where it goes. Maybe I should say where it already goes. I'm not talking about blasting a new railroad line here. I'm talking about the practice of following where the railroad already goes. Somebody has already been there before you, somebody with vision and surveying instruments who has given it some thought. So you don't have to calculate. You can just swing your arms and move, choosing certain sidings and switchings to taste. As Adam Smith might have said, you're in good invisible hands. And then you could add on to whatever you encounter as it suits you. A railroad, as a rule, will not lead into a swamp or to a cliff edge and just stop. It will have circuited the swamp or trestled over the chasm in relatively level fashion. Somebody will have scouted ahead and routed for easy travel. All the impassable stuff has already been figured out and sidelined. You can practically glide over the meanest ditch you might have ever fell into in a fog. A deer trail or even a people path cannot be trusted in that way. Those double back from or peter out in intermediate, possibly scenic destinations of no real utility or interest. Railroads are part of a network. They come and go, but never actually get anywhere themselves. The means, but not the ends, you might say. A railroad is there. It's up to you to get somewhere. So, if a locomotive has gone before you, it is likely you're going to come out the other side, and in a place that was worthwhile enough for a locomotive to go. And you may see some pretty interesting things along the way, perhaps long since hidden, if you keep your eyes open. If you want a metaphor, I'm not really asking here. Here's how I view it. If you feel like you want to go from Iberia to Rome, a couple hundred years BCE, just follow Hannibal. Elephants blew the way overland through the rolling plains and over the Alps and down through the diseased swamps with the face-slapping thistle reeds along the coast, and there they were, looking at the 7 hills in the near distance. If you want to get there, follow the elephants. And if you're walking, you might even catch a few largemouth along the way. That was my particular angle. I'm not saying what yours might be. You can occupy yourself along the way any way you want. You can listen to bird songs or songs in your head. It's just that I was a fisherman from birth, and I had also been taught by one of the best, and I learned to do it even better than the master who taught me, which doesn't matter, just that the opportunity was there, and a lot of it was along railroad tracks. The train was now on a track where I had never been, but it was still familiar, an unsurprising extension, passing places where I could have been. Then a little south of Etowah, we forked to the east, and things started to change a little. At first, we were in one of those parallel situations where you can easily see the path you could have taken, the other fork. It looks exactly like the one you're on, though even now you can see there is no earthly connection between the two. But in fact, and you do know this, that other path, it is utterly, maybe even fatally, who knows, different. Or could be a bonanza, of course, beyond your wildest dreams. And then things changed completely. We veered due east and angled upwards with a minor groan, anticipating the downward flow against us of the Hiawassee Valley. I could see the 2 looming rounded peaks astride the gap we were going to transit. They had not stopped the Hiawassee coming the other way, and they weren't going to stop us going up our own way. Uphill, this was new. We paralleled and then crossed the Hiawassee. I could see the truly high and fast water, including white water. That I was not familiar with. Bass fishermen don't really understand fast water. This was more like trout habitat. Bass are often on the move to find conditions that please only themselves. Trout wait in pools and bends for things to flow by. To catch bass, you don't just have to fool them. First, you have to find them. 3 hours into my trip, I realized that a lot of what I knew about my native world would not apply in this new place. Up there, I would have needed a different guide. The diesel slowed at Reliance and at McFarland and stopped at McKaysville. I got off at Ellijay, across the line in Georgia, although we never really stopped there either. Some mailbags were thrown off and on. I think there were some transfers of goods, no other people. The cab crew figured I could handle a ladder down to the platform, slowly moving at 2 or 3 miles per hour, and I did. I had come to see a friend of mine. I'm not going to tell you his name. He wouldn't have wanted it bandied about. I never met him. But I heard about him at a dinner for Navy vets in a wing of the Knoxville Coliseum. They were all in uniform, and I was bussing tables in mine. Boy Scout, first class, 3-point shield with eagle, tie tucked in my shirt behind my apron. And I learned that my friend was in the ground. But I wanted him to know that a story that was told about him there that night was not going to be forgotten. The churchyard was a little out of town. It wasn't hard to get a ride on a country road back in those days, and I could hitch back that same way to Knoxville. An old green pickup truck guy stopped with a little skid. He didn't want to pick me up, but he knew it was the right thing to do. They were 3 days out of Tinian, headed for Japan in August of 45. They were turning around, and they were throwing their ammo over the side. Somebody got careless. I didn't know all that much about the man from Ellijay, and it was me that did most of the talking beside that grave. But there was another man on that ship that day who mattered to me a lot. The one who cut me my first fishing pole out of a hickory limb and taught me most of what I know about life even now, pretty much by saying nothing, pretty much by just clearing the way. And if it wasn't for the man from Ellijay, I never would have known that not talkative man. And I didn't want the man from Ellijay to think that what he did that day had been forgotten.